December 16, 1944. Early morning in Mona, Germany. The frozen ground shook as another American artillery salvo thundered high in the sky. However, this morning brought with it something completely different, terrifying and completely inexplicable. The shells did not fall into the mud or into the trees. They exploded right in the air, right over the advancing German positions, raining down a deadly shower of steel fragments that even the deepest trench could not protect against. The soldiers of the 326th People's Grenadier Division, who attacked the positions of the 38th Cavalry Squadron, were veterans who had passed the harsh trials of the Eastern Front, but now they were faced with a phenomenon that completely broke their established ideas about fighting. It wasn't the artillery they knew. It wasn't the predictable strikes. It wasn't the relative safety zones. And it wasn't the usual defensive function of the trenches. It was death, sent down from above with amazing mathematical precision. It was at this critical moment that Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group made one of the most fateful and unauthorized decisions during the entire Battle of the Bulge. Contrary to direct and strict orders, without seeking permission from the High Command, he ordered his gunners to load the guns with shells containing the most carefully guarded secret of the Allied arsenal: non-contact fuses. These innovative devices, equipped with miniature radar systems, were able to independently measure the distance to the target and detonate at an optimal height, which, according to calculations, increased the destructive effectiveness of artillery fire by 50 times. In the icy wilds of the Ardennes, the mathematics of war itself was rewritten on the verge. The German soldiers could not even imagine that they had just encountered a weapon that would not only change the course of this particular battle, but would also have a fundamental impact on the future of military affairs.
A storm broke. The operation, dubbed Watch on the River, initially looked very promising for the Wehrmacht. 200,000 German troops, 1,000 tanks, and about 2,000 artillery pieces participated in this last desperate adventure of Hitler, artfully camouflaged in the foggy Ardennes forest. The Führer convinced his generals that this powerful offensive would split the Allied forces, allow the return of Antwerp, and turn the tide of the war, which was inexorably approaching complete defeat. The first wave of artillery preparation, which began at 5:30 on December 16th, provided the full tactical effect of surprise. The German artillery rained down a barrage of fire at a rate of 1,600 rounds per minute on the 85-meter-wide front. The intelligence of the American troops suffered a complete and catastrophic failure. They failed to detect a massive concentration of enemy forces, and many of the advanced units consisted of either inexperienced recruits or exhausted veterans who had been sent to this quiet sector for a breather. But at Mount Schau, Colonel Axelson found himself in a critical, desperate tactical situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was actually defeated by numerically superior German forces. Conventional artillery installations were unable to stop the rapid advance. In a state of extreme despair, Axelson made a historically significant decision. He used secret short-range projectiles without any permission. Subsequently, his act threatened him with a military tribunal. But at that crucial moment, he realized that following the rules would mean imminent defeat. The effect was immediate and devastating. The German soldiers, advancing in a traditional assault formation, suddenly found themselves under fire they had never encountered before. The shells exploded 30 to 50 feet above their heads. Each such explosion formed a cone of fragments, which covered a much larger area than the fragmentation field from conventional ground shells. Veterans who knew perfectly well how to hide from standard artillery died right in their trenches, behind thick tree trunks, in ditches, wherever they tried in vain to find shelter. The secret science of death. The non-contact fuse was the culmination of outstanding American scientific developments and industrial potential, operating at the limit of its capabilities. Unlike standard projectiles, which required either a direct hit or delayed action fuses, which often detonated at the wrong height, the non-contact fuse was a compact, autonomous radar system slightly larger than an ordinary coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers placed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes, depending on the model, which were designed to withstand incredible overloads 20,000 times higher than the Earth's gravity, occurring at the moment of firing an artillery piece. The physics of this process was truly amazing. At the moment of the shot itself, the tremendous acceleration destroyed the glass ampule with electrolyte, which instantly created a battery that powered the tiny radar throughout the entire flight of the projectile. The head of this highly intensive development, comparable in secrecy to the Manhattan Project, was Merle Tuve from the Johns Hopkins Laboratory of Applied Physics.
At its peak, 3% of all American physicists worked in this laboratory, disguised as a completely inconspicuous used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland. The security and strict control system corresponded to the atomic bomb program. Employees were strictly forbidden to discuss their work, even with family members, and each fuse had a unique serial number stamped on it for accurate tracking. The technical difficulty seemed insurmountable at first. The vacuum tubes, originally designed for household radios, had to be completely redesigned so that they could withstand the power of an artillery shot. They had to function smoothly at extreme rotational speeds, operate in all weather conditions, and be sensitive enough to detect a target while preventing premature detonation. A key breakthrough was achieved thanks to miniaturization technologies, which subsequently revolutionized the electronic industry. The tubes developed by Dr. James Van Allen were no larger than a pencil eraser, but they contained all the necessary elements of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were already producing 40,000 non-contact fuses every day. More than 100 companies, from RC and General Electric to Sylvania and Crosley Corporation, have contributed to this massive program. The total cost of the program reached $1 billion in the prices of the 40s, second only to the Manhattan Project in terms of military spending. Authorization crisis and expansion. The unauthorized use of non-contact fuses by Colonel Axelson on December 16th immediately caused a serious crisis in the command staff. He violated direct instructions that prohibited the use of these devices in ground-based guns, out of fear that captured samples could fall into the hands of the Germans and be reproduced. However, the destructive effectiveness of these munitions under Mona was undeniable. The German offensive was stopped swiftly and harshly, with losses that shocked both sides. The news of the use of this powerful weapon quickly reached the Supreme Headquarters. General Eisenhower, fully aware of the desperate situation in the Ardennes region, officially requested permission to use them on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were completely lifted, and non-contact fuses were allowed for general use in ground combat throughout the Ardennes salient. The incredibly rapid spread that followed was a clear demonstration of America's superiority in the field of logistics. Within just a few days, artillery units throughout the region began receiving shells equipped with non-contact fuses. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion in Bastogne received its shipment just at the moment when the German encirclement closed around the city. The 420th Field Armored Artillery Battalion, with M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwestern approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, used them with devastating effect to the southwest of Bastogne. Each division soon came to the same conclusion. Non-contact fuses transformed artillery from a simple support weapon into a crucial tool on the battlefield. The forward observers no longer needed to waste precious time carefully adjusting their fire. The fuses independently found the optimal trigger point. Accuracy requirements have dropped dramatically, and lethality has increased exponentially.
Bastogne, surrounded but undefeated. The siege of Bastogne became the clearest demonstration of the use of non-contact fuses in defensive combat. The 101st Airborne Division, being completely surrounded and outnumbered, heroically held a vital road junction, repelling repeated German attacks. Artillery support was provided by the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm howitzers capable of firing non-contact projectiles. According to the official reports of the unit, in the period from the 19th to the 31st of December, the 463rd Battalion fired exactly 7,676 shots. Although not all of them had non-contact fuses due to the limited supply, those that were used had a devastating psychological and physical impact. German assault groups were literally melting away under the blows of aerial explosions. An entire platoon could be destroyed in a matter of seconds. The attack on December 22nd, which followed General McAuliffe's famous "nuts" response to the demand for surrender, convincingly demonstrated the effectiveness of these weapons. The German infantry, advancing across the snow-covered fields in their usual formation, was taken by surprise. Shells with non-contact ignition exploded exactly as calculated above their heads, creating overlapping zones of total destruction in which there was not a single safe point. An equally important role was played by the 969th Artillery Battalion, consisting exclusively of African Americans. Their 155mm howitzers formed a ring of death around the perimeter of Bastogne, which the German troops considered insurmountable. More powerful shells, exploding at a height of 50 feet, covered even larger areas with deadly fragments. Captured Germans later reported that attacking units often lost their combat coordination even before they reached the American positions, and soldiers fled in panic from incomprehensible explosions in the air. The massacre on the Sauer River. Perhaps the most thoroughly documented demonstration of the lethality of non-contact fuses occurred on the Sauer River, near Ekaton, on December 25th and 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was moving north to relieve Bastogne, witnessed this battle personally and described it in his memoirs, The War as I Knew It. The German battalion, which attempted to cross the partially frozen river, believed that they were hidden by darkness and fog from American observers. Traditional artillery would have required long and painstaking adjustments to fire, which would have given the Germans time to complete the crossing or find cover. But shells with non-contact ignition did not need such a complex setup. Patton wrote in his memoirs, "We found a German battalion crossing the Sauer. The new positional ammunition was absolutely devastating. Shells exploded in the air directly above them. They had nowhere to run. The river was behind us, our fire was ahead and higher. When the shooting stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This horrifying figure of 702 people killed, according to actual estimates, is one of the few accurately documented casualty figures directly caused by the use of non-contact fuses. Their mathematical efficiency was truly amazing."
In an open area, a non-contact fuse detonating at a distance of 30 to 50 feet was exceptionally lethal in itself. But in conditions of dense forest, its destructive effect increased exponentially. The air blasts caused branches and tree trunks to snap, which generated thousands of additional wooden projectiles. These splinters, some of which reached the length of a human arm, flew at a speed of hundreds of feet per second, becoming an additional deadly factor. Traditional defensive positions, shelters behind large trees, hastily dug foxholes under the roots, instantly lost their protective value. The rain of shrapnel and wood flew from above, completely nullifying the centuries-old tactical wisdom of fighting in the forests. American artillery crews quickly appreciated this multiplier effect. Just 155mm shell with a non-contact charge exploding over the crowns was able to completely clear an area comparable in size to a tennis court of all living things. The combination of metal fragments from ammunition and wood chips from broken trees formed a 360-degree impact zone that could not be avoided by any tactical tricks. The German units, well trained in combat operations in the forest, found that all their combat experience was useless. The dispersal of personnel, designed to minimize large losses from the single hit, made military personnel vulnerable to a wide area of damage.
Gathering in groups for mutual support, on the contrary, meant that entire detachments could be completely destroyed with just one shell. There was simply no simple and correct tactical response to this new incomprehensible threat. Technological superiority in action. The principles on which the non-contact fused functioned sounded like real science fiction to the soldiers of the 1940s. Each fuse was equipped with a miniature radio transmitter operating at frequencies from 180 to 220 MHz, which continuously emitted waves reflected from the ground, trees, machinery, and even human bodies. As the projectile approached the surface of the Earth or an object, the reflected signal inevitably increased. When the force of this explosive pulse reached a predetermined intensity, which corresponded to the optimal detonation height, the electronic switch instantly initiated an explosion. All this complex system had to work flawlessly in conditions capable of disabling ordinary consumer electronics. At the moment of the shot, the acceleration reached 20,000 times that of Earth, which theoretically could literally flatten a human body to a microscopic thickness. The projectiles rotated around their axis at such speeds that enormous centrifugal forces were created. The temperature range ranged from 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to deep minus at the highest point of the flight path. Nevertheless, the tiny vacuum tubes, protected by innovative cushioning systems, had withstood these harsh tests and demonstrated over 80% reliability. The optimal height for detonation was carefully determined during large-scale tests of 105mm howitzers at the Ardennes Proving Ground. The 30-foot height was considered ideal for standard divisional artillery. 155mm guns reached their maximum lethal level at 50 feet. The rare 200mm shells created a devastating effect at an altitude of over 70 feet, capable of destroying enemy forces on entire cartographical squares. This technological superiority directly ensured the dominance of the Allies on the battlefield. The analysis showed that non-contact fuses increased the overall destructive power by 5 to 10 times compared to conventional projectiles. The area affected by shrapnel increased 50 times. The use in air defense showed even more impressive results. The probability of shooting down flying V-1 bombs increased from 17% to 79% in just a few weeks after equipping anti-aircraft guns with non-contact fuses.
Intelligence failure and German confusion. The catastrophic failure of German intelligence regarding non-contact fuses was decisive. In December 1944, the Wehrmacht troops seized an American ammunition depot where, among other things, there were about 20,000 shells equipped with non-contact fuses. This unexpected finding should have triggered the immediate development of countermeasures. Instead, German technicians examined the captured samples and concluded that their creation was impossible. The presence of vacuum tubes inside an artillery shell completely contradicted all the established ideas of German engineers about electronics and ballistics. They mistakenly assumed that the Americans were using some form of magnetic detection, or that the visible electronic components were just a decoy, hiding a real mechanism unknown to them. This serious miscalculation was partly caused by institutional blindness. Before the start of the war, Germany was actually a leader in the development of non-contact fuses. By 1940, the companies Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin already had working prototypes. But Hitler's personal order, canceling all weapons projects that took more than 6 months to produce, led to the program's shutdown. The German engineers simply could not believe that the Americans had managed to solve the problems that they themselves had previously retreated from. The irony of fate was even more evident when analyzing Germany's technical capabilities. Their electrostatic, non-contact fuses, based on measuring changes in electrical capacitance rather than radar, have shown 95% test reliability. If development had not been stopped, Germany could well have had non-contact fuses by 1941. Hermann Göring later admitted during interrogation that German similar fuses were ready for production only 3 or 4 months after the actual end of the war.
The Christmas disaster. December 25, 1944, did not bring any festive rest to the German troops. The Wehrmacht units, who tried to use Christmas for resupply and reorganization, found that the non-contact fuses did not comply with any ceasefire. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and gathering points were subjected to devastating bombardments that did not require the presence of advanced observers. Only the 420th Field Armored Artillery Battalion fired more than 1,000 shells on Christmas Day, the vast majority of which detonated in close proximity to the target. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers fired fast and accurately, which took the German units by surprise. The ability to fire effectively without visual observation in bad weather and in the dark has transformed artillery from a day-to-day weapon into a 24-hour threat. The psychological impact was extremely strong. German soldiers were used to moving during bad weather when Allied aircraft could not fly and observers could not spot them. Non-contact fuses have completely destroyed this safe haven. Death could come at any moment, regardless of the weather, without any warning except for the short, characteristic whistle of a flying projectile.
Malmedy and Scorzini's elite squad. On December 21st, the elite SS commandos of Colonel Otto Scorzini attempted to capture Malmedy. These were not just soldiers, they were specially selected troops who liberated Mussolini, almost captured Tito, and infiltrated American positions disguised in enemy uniforms. They represented the best that Germany could put up. However, they faced devastating short-range artillery fire, which turned their American disguise from a tactical advantage into a death shroud. The shells exploded overhead with uncanny precision, giving the impression that they could somehow detect the disguised impostors below. Although the exact casualty figures in this episode remain a matter of dispute, the attack ended in a catastrophic failure with heavy casualties, effectively ending Scorzini's offensive operations. The psychological breakdown in the elite SS units proved to be particularly significant. These soldiers, who were inspired by the belief in German superiority and trained to the highest standards, were completely helpless in the face of American technology. According to reports, some survivors rushed directly to the American positions, preferring a quick death to prolonged and inexplicable bombing, which led to a complete violation of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical troops. An industrial achievement. The miracle of producing non-contact fuses was comparable to any major industrial achievement of wartime. By December 1944, more than 100 American companies had reoriented their production capacities to these fuses. The Crosley Corporation abandoned the production of refrigerators in favor of assembling secret fuses. Emerson Radio switched from consumer electronics to military production. The companies Sylvania, Arcia, and General Electric have allocated entire production lines for this program. Quality control has surpassed anything ever used in mass production. Each of the 130 components underwent individual testing. Each solder joint was tested under multiple magnification. For guaranteed survival in combat conditions, random samples were selected for test shootings. The marriage rate was incredibly high. Any part that had minimal deviations was immediately discarded. The staff, mostly women, maintained this precision by working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. Because of the strictest security regime, they did not know what exactly they were producing, realizing only that it was vital for military affairs. By December 1944, they were producing one non-contact fuse every 2 seconds around the clock. The cost reduction achieved was significant. In 1942, the cost of each fuse was $732, which exceeded the annual salary of a worker. By December 1944, mass production had reduced the cost to $18 per unit while maintaining the highest quality. Such industrial efficiency allowed the manufacture of 22 million fuses during the entire war, of which 200,000 were used only during the Battle of the Bulge.
Patton's arithmetic. General Patton understood the strategic value of proximity fuses better than perhaps any other military commander. His Third Army, advancing to liberate Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed a new tactic specifically adapted for the use of non-contact fuses. For the first time in history, Williams began using them to achieve a one-time concentration of fire on a target. Several battalions fired at the same time so that the shells arrived at the target synchronously. When dozens of non-contact shells exploded simultaneously at the optimal height, the effect was apocalyptic. The German soldiers called it the death knell. During the week from December 22nd to December 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 short-range shells. The results proved decisive for breaking the German resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself later wrote, "This funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." The Battle of Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated the maximum effectiveness of non-contact fuses. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held a critical position against the 6th SS Panzer Army, which included the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. In 3 days, from the 17th to the 19th of December, the American artillery fired 160,000 shells, of which about 40,000 were with non-contact fuses. These 25% of the shells caused an estimated 60% of the more than 5,000 German casualties. The mathematical calculations were indisputable. Non-contact fuses increased the total firepower of the Americans 4 times. German assault groups, who repeatedly climbed steep, densely overgrown slopes, again and again encountered impenetrable walls of exploding steel in the air. Entire companies disappeared in a matter of seconds. The bodies fell so densely that the next waves of soldiers had to literally step over their own dead comrades. After 3 days of fruitless attacks, the offensive completely stopped. The elite units of the Waffen-SS were broken not only by American bravery, but also by American technology. Operation to destroy Bodenplatte. On January 1, 1945, the German Air Force launched Operation Bodenplatte, during which 900 Luftwaffe fighters attacked Allied airfields. The effect of surprise was absolute, and many Allied planes were destroyed right on the ground. But the returning German pilots were met by incredibly dense anti-aircraft fire. Of the 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 were shot down by anti-aircraft guns, most of which already used non-contact fuses. The number of dead was staggering for both sides. German pilots, specially trained in maneuvering to evade anti-aircraft fire, were horrified to discover that the shells exploded exactly where they could cause maximum damage. The Luftwaffe, already severely depleted, could not recover from these heavy losses.
Disclosure of secrets. By the beginning of January 1945, it was simply impossible to maintain secrecy. Too many shells were used, too many soldiers have witnessed their catastrophic impact. On January 6th, the Ministry of War authorized limited disclosure of information. The New York Times newspaper published a report on a new type of artillery shell, which greatly increases the effectiveness of American weapons, but did not explain the technology of its operation. German intelligence finally realized the significance of these weapons, but it was already too late. The report, Foreign Army in the West, dated January 10th, stated, "The Americans have a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates projectiles at an optimal height to ensure an anti-personnel effect. These weapons led to serious losses among our troops in the Ardennes Mountains. There are no effective countermeasures." Strategic Impact Assessment. Post-war analysis finally confirmed the decisive impact of non-contact fuses. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated, "Non-contact fuses played a crucial role. Our attacks failed not because of the courage of the Americans, although they fought admirably, but because of the artillery, which seemed to have eyes." General Hasso Montefel, commander of the 5th Tank Army, testified, "The American artillery terrified our soldiers, especially the new shells exploding in the air.
They caused panic even among experienced veteran soldiers. The statistics speak for themselves. 200,000 short-range shells were fired, which is estimated to have resulted in the loss of between 15,000 and 20,000 German soldiers, representing up to 20% of total German casualties. These weapons were 5 to 10 times more effective than conventional ammunition, and did not require direct observation in bad weather. Human sacrifice. Every statistical calculation hid a personal human tragedy. German soldiers, many of whom were teenagers drafted at the final stage of the war, died using methods that traditional military science could not imagine. They were killed by weapons that seemed to have intelligence and found them wherever they tried to hide. American workers have also paid a price. Industrial accidents were hushed up for the sake of secrecy. Employees of Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other enterprises suffered from nervous breakdowns due to stress and overwork. They produced weapons of unprecedented lethality without knowing their purpose and bore this burden in forced silence. However, the moral calculation of war is never simple. The Battle of the Bulge claimed the lives of 19,000 Americans. How many more people would have died without proximity fuses? How long would the war have dragged on? How many more Holocaust victims would have died during the protracted battles? Each shortened day of the war potentially saved thousands of people awaiting liberation in concentration camps.
Technological heritage. The non-contact fuse program led to scientific breakthroughs that changed post-war technology forever. Miniature vacuum tubes have become the fundamental basis for modern electronics. The quality control procedures established for the manufacture of fuses have become industry standards. The organizational methods of coordinating hundreds of suppliers marked the beginning of modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen applied his experience in miniaturization to create satellite equipment. Later, he discovered the Earth's radiation belts. The principles of radar operation embodied in projectiles have evolved into modern systems. The concept of autonomous sensors capable of making decisions formed the basis of guided missiles and ultimately all intelligent weapons. Today, every precision-guided munition is powered by the principle of a non-contact fuse. It was the first weapon capable of recognizing the environment and choosing the moment to explode on its own. The revolution that began in the Ardennes continues on modern battlefields where intelligent weapons dominate the fighting. The final calculation. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945, with the complete retreat of German troops. Hitler's last offensive cost Germany about 100,000 casualties without bringing any strategic benefits. The American losses amounted to 75,000 people, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse has proven itself not only as an effective weapon, but also as a means of winning the war. General Eisenhower's assessment that Germany's proximity fuses could make D-Day extremely difficult and possibly impossible underscores their strategic importance. It was not just an improvement in artillery, but a revolutionary technology that fundamentally changed the mathematics of warfare. German soldiers faced with short-range artillery experienced something unprecedented. Death from projectiles that seemed reasonable, that could find them anywhere, that turned the very air into a killing zone. Their experience marked the transition of war into the age of high technology. From the unauthorized first use by Colonel Axelson on December 16, 1944, to the systematic use of 200,000 shells throughout the Ardennes salient, non-contact fuses have demonstrated that scientific innovation can provide a decisive military advantage. Combining American industrial potential, scientific genius, and tactical adaptation allowed the creation of weapons that helped decide the outcome of the war. The story of the proximity fuse is ultimately about transformation, technological, tactical, and human. This proved that industrial democracy is capable of creating weapons of destructive effectiveness, that innovation can overcome numerical superiority, and that the side with advanced science is likely to win. These lessons influenced not only the outcome of the Second World War, but also the entire subsequent structure of warfare. The age of technological warfare has indeed arrived in the icy forests of the Ardennes. The mathematics of death has been rewritten, using tiny radars embedded in artillery shells, which has forever changed the way humans wage war. The German soldiers who died from short-range shell explosions were victims not just of a specific battle, but of the military revolution that continues to shape our world today.
In 1995 to 1997, the materials of Operation Venona were made available to the public. It was the code name for the systematic work of American intelligence agencies to collect and decrypt intercepted radio messages exchanged between Soviet intelligence stations in the United States and Moscow in the period from 1943 to 1945. Operation Venona started in 1943 and lasted for almost 40 years. The documents obtained during Venona irrefutably confirmed, in particular, that the American radio engineer, Julius Rosenberg, who was later executed along with his wife on charges of espionage in favor of the Soviet Union, really collaborated with Soviet intelligence, while his motive was solely ideological conviction. Rosenberg's name is most often mentioned in the context of the American and Soviet nuclear programs. However, the information he provided was by no means limited to atomic secrets alone. It is known that in December 1944, he managed to obtain and transfer to Soviet intelligence officer Alexander Feklisov comprehensive technical documentation as well as a sample of a ready-made radar fuse. Soviet technicians gave this product the highest rating. At their insistence, a resolution was adopted by the Council of Ministers of the USSR on the creation of a special design bureau for further development of this device and on the immediate establishment of its mass production. On July 5, 1945, the USSR State Defense Committee adopted Resolution No. 9390 on the formation of a commission on German radar products. Alexander Ivanovich Shokin, the future minister of the electronic industry of the Soviet Union, was appointed head of the group of engineering and scientific workers. The work of this commission included collecting samples of devices and finished products, obtaining technical documentation, studying industrial enterprises, as well as searching for and employing German qualified specialists. At the end of 1945, Military Plant No. 58, a former shotgun foundry in Moscow of the People's Commissariat of Ammunition, along with its Special Design Bureau, was reoriented to mass production of radio equipment for mass ammunition, according to a decision of the USSR government. First of all, this concerned the production of radar fuses for anti-aircraft shells and aerial bombs. As a result of these intensive efforts, just a few years later, the production of exact copies of American-type fuses was successfully established in the Soviet Union under the designation R. These fuses were produced in several versions up to the 1960s, adding to the impressive list of weapons and military equipment obtained by the Soviet Union through active military-industrial espionage and subsequent copying of foreign designs.